Nakul, I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure. What's up?
For the homework, the version I have Sibelius 8. I think there's you put the link as a new updated version. Uh, and it won't let me open it. Like
Oh, oh, so there's two. Which homework did you try to open?
three.
Oh, well, the thing about. Oh, I see. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I can send out. It's just the last page you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I forgot to do that for the last page because I was like, part of me was thinking if it's worth doing that because it's only the last page, but I guess it's still helpful to have the document. So I can upload a previous version of that.
Okay, thank you. So how like what would for the homework, what would be your recommendation for how like what should we should do it on? Or if because it's
Oh,
mostly just that PDF file, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. So I would recommend just transferring the answers to a single sheet of paper because it's all multiple choice.
Okay, that's right. That's right. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way, especially since the TAs, I think they'll be working off an answer key that's all on one page too. So,
Okay.
uh,
Right.
but either way, I guess there's no problem doing either way. But yeah, it's better not to print if you don't have to that many pages.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Nakul, I had a question about the homework too.
Yeah, sure. About homework
Um,
two or homework three.
no, about the most recent homework.
Oh,
Is
okay.
the Are the first five questions like a select all that apply type of thing, or is there only one correct answer for each? Because I think for like the first page or two, a lot of the things seem to have like multiple answers.
Yeah, so that's a great question. In fact, I will tell you right now that basically if you see multiple answers, that's a giveaway that it's the wrong answer because
Okay.
there's lots of synonyms, and that really is basically telling you that you don't. Oh, whoa, sorry. Yeah, that you don't want to actually choose that answer because it's incorrect. So that's process of elimination. There's only one answer correct. So I could actually I could talk about how I approach some of the homework. One of the students, I'm just asking everyone to start their video right now. But I'm just I was helping a student with it, and there are some confusing aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that the best way to approach the homework is by thinking about every single homework problem and just go every single possible answer and doing process of elimination. Um, yeah, it gets your brain to think in a different way. I've noticed it's not as straightforward because it's more of an objective enterprise. Sorry, subjective enterprise. Um, but yeah, I guess that is worth discussing. So I could show you guys a little bit of that.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Thanks.
Of course, yeah, yeah, yeah. In fact, let me share my screen really quickly. Cool. Guess I'll share computer sound, and I might have to do one last thing with my keyboard. Should work though, right off the bat. Okay. Huh. Okay. There we go. Okay. I'm wearing headphones for no reason. Can you hear this on the Zoom? Cool. Okay. Um, so before I actually discuss that on the homework, I think I'm gonna press through and finish the conversation on the different types of ways you can kind of solidify or unify phrases. I'll go a little bit back and just talk about phrase for a little bit again as a useful unit. So much of the time phrases are 4 bars in length, but not always. But that could be a way you can kind of discover phrases. But I think the main way that's useful in kind of discovering a phrase is that it has a strong melodic statement and it has a harmonic cadence at the end of it. So that's one way that a phrase can be differentiated from a motif, because a motif might have a strong melodic statement, but it doesn't necessarily have a strong cadence at the end. So, and a theme might have several strong melodic statements and several harmonic cadences. So I think that's kind of the middle ground that a phrase lives in. It has both of those properties. So for instance, here's the melody of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And it's in the key of G major, the way I've written out this time. And you see that the melody starts out with a 1 chord in G major. I mean, this is, I guess, the official harmonization of how the song goes, but you can see how this would work with the 1 chord very well. It's a chord tone on a separate slide, actually. So then this note is, this note of the melody corresponds with the 4 chord, and this note of the melody corresponds with the 1 chord. And these notes of the melody correspond with the 5 chord. These notes of the melody correspond with the 1 chord. These notes of the melody correspond with the 5 chord. And this note of the melody corresponds with the 1 chord. So what we have, I guess, by the end of it, is a perfect authentic cadence. It's an authentic cadence because it goes from a 5 chord to a 1 chord. And it's a perfect authentic cadence because the chord degree of the melody note is a 1, is 1. Right? So this might be worth just backing up just a little bit. I'll say this. If I go back to this chord section, and I think there's a thing about non-harmonic tones. This is the same melody of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in G major. And this is how this is one way you can wrap your head around how a person harmonizes a melody with specific chords. Essentially, you kind of, if you're not given any chords at all and you're trying to provide chords to a melody, this act is called harmonization. And a good way to approach harmonization is by thinking about the notes of the melody and just considering chords that the notes of the melody could work with as chord tones. So for instance, this might have been the way that the person who invented the melody Twinkle Twinkle Little Star actually came up with chords for it. So someone might realize that G, G, and D, D both conveniently fit into a G major chord, whereas E and E kind of fit nicely into a C major chord, and D fits into a G major chord. D could also fit into a D major chord. So I guess the way it's written right here is this is the way it's written currently. It's a 1, 4, 1. It's a slight digression, but I think it's worth discussing since we're on the subject slightly. Sorry. Whoops. So the G major chord is a 1 chord in this context. And but this D note could also fit in with a D major chord, right? So I could have actually played a D major chord here and done a 5 chord, and that would actually make this part of the music a half cadence. But instead, the author decides to choose a 1 chord right here, and it ends up being a plagal cadence at this particular moment in time. Anyway, this is just a little bit of the thought process I had when actually describing these chords. I know these chords were already written beforehand, but if you did want to come up with chords and you didn't have any chords that were given to you beforehand, that's a way you could do that. And this was all done just to kind of convince you that this particular phrase does in fact have a strong harmonic resolution at the end. And it does because classically speaking, this melody, normally the penultimate chord is a 5 chord and the final chord is a 1 chord, and it happens at the very end of the statement of the phrase. So what we have is a perfect authentic cadence. So that's really a phrase. It has a strong melodic statement and it has a harmonic cadence at the end of it. Okay? So a phrase is useful, but actually a phrase is really useful when talking about it in the context of other phrases, to describe larger entities, larger forms. And we're actually going to talk about how you can take phrases and even combine them into yet even larger forms than the scope of what your homework talks about for this previous week. So a period consists of 2 or more phrases. I guess no, a period just consists, well, a classical period consists of 2 phrases. Okay. There's the antecedent phrase, the question phrase, and the answer phrase. Now the idea is you could have a phrase that has a weaker harmonic cadence, and then you could have another phrase that has a stronger harmonic cadence. Both this phrase and this phrase both have strong melodic statements. This phrase has a strong melodic statement with a cadence at the end, and this phrase has a strong melodic statement with a cadence at the end. Someone asked, are we still on jazz or classical? We're at this exact point in time, I guess you could argue that this is applicable for both, but in the strict sense of the exercises that we're going to study, we're in classical. But we're going to go back and forth. When you say jazz or classical, I guess I would say that, yeah, I guess you could use harmonic analysis for jazz or classical. This Roman numeral analysis, truth be told. But anyway, you have a phrase with a harmonic resolution right here, which is a half cadence. Incidentally, the way I figured out the chord at this particular moment was in this manner. If you have a chord that isn't, if you have a measure where the harmony isn't like clearly given to you as a snowman, what you have to do is you sort of have to inference the harmony by looking at the biggest beats of the measure. So the time signature gives you the biggest beats of the measure, it gives you 3 big beats. It just happens to be that harmonic tones tend, I mean, this is a stereotype that isn't always true, but a good starting point for, especially for a lot of exercises that you'll be expected to come across, is that the important significant harmonic material will happen on the big beats. So that's what I circled right here. This is beat 1, this is beat 2, and this is beat 3. And if you take all of the notes on the big beats and you kind of squash them all together, you'll get, I guess you'll get a D major triad. In order, it would actually look like this. And in the key that we're in, which is G minor, a D major triad is actually a 5 chord. Okay? So what we have is the strong melodic statement. Oops, let me find my pedal. I feel incomplete when I'm not using, this is the pedal. Oh wait, yeah, I feel incomplete when I can't sustain notes. Liszt called the pedal the soul of the piano. It's the soul of my keyboard in this case, but anyway. That's a little catchy little melody, right? It's got some depth to it, and it's got a harmonic feature at the end of it, which kind of closes it. Okay, so that's what I just played. However, contrast that with the next phrase. Whoops. So I guess react. How many of you guys think, I guess use the participants chat feature. How many of you guys, am I recording this? It should be recording. Does it say it's recording?
Yeah, you're recording.
Okay, great. So far I've remembered. If I ever am not recording, just remind me, someone just stop me and say, hey, you're not recording. Okay, so how many of you guys thought the first phrase was the most powerful? How many of you guys thought the second phrase was the most powerful? We've got a lot of hands here. Okay, great. Okay, yeah, the answer is the second phrase. It's kind of obvious, but I wanted to use that feature, so I got to use it. Yeah, great. So it just so happens that you call the first phrase the antecedent phrase or the question phrase. There's many. See, what's confusing about this is there's many different names for these terms, which is something you've probably noticed on your homework. And Kayla brought up the idea that, well, sometimes, and we'll talk about this when we look at the homework. Sometimes the homework will give you multiple choices where several of the choices are the same concept. Well, in the game of process of elimination, that certainly, since you can't select more than one correct answer, that means that if you see two of the same answer, that means both of those duplicate answers are incorrect. So if you see, let's say you see a question where the answers are antecedent phrase, question phrase, something else, and something else. Well, you can automatically rule out both antecedent phrase and question phrase because they're both the same. And that would, if you selected one without selecting the other, it wouldn't make sense. So anyway, so this is one way you can organize phrases. You can organize two phrases as into a period. Pretty interesting. Now here is some other information on that. This is the same exact thing. Oh, interesting. I must have copied this from the previous slide. This is a different part of the minuet. Never mind. Okay. So here is another phrase from the minuet. Just making sure that's true. Yeah, this is another phrase from the minuet. Strong melodic statement. Right. Nice little incomplete kind of a weak cadence at the end, right? Contrast that with the next phrase. Cool. You guys can all hear that, right? Okay, great. Okay, so interesting. So a contrasting period is when the first phrase of the period doesn't have any material that resembles the second phrase of the period. Right? This beginning, da 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 da, doesn't sound like this, right? Okay, contrast a contrasting period with a parallel period. Okay, now check this out. So parallel period consists of two phrases that begin with the same material, either on the same pitch or transposed, and have a similar harmonic structure. So sometimes the way music theorists describe parallel phrases is by using this prime notation, which you're familiar with if you've seen Transformers, Optimus Prime. No reference to this at all, but it does use the word prime. Okay, so not the primest example I could come up with, but anyway, the first phrase has A. The second phrase is A prime. So if you say A apostrophe, it's not some weird grammatically incorrect thing. It's not a spelling typo. This stands for A prime. Okay. So phrase 1 has melody A. Phrase 2 has melody A prime, which that is a slightly transformed version of A. Okay, so I'll play this. I'm going to butcher this a little bit. I apologize. Whoops. Right, it has an incomplete cadence. Let's see. Whoops. The reason I know it's an incomplete cadence is this. Let's actually figure this out together as a class. So what key are we in?
D major.
D major, okay. So key of D major. Great. Okay, now let's check this out. So interestingly, let's just look at these notes. What notes do we have here? Someone tell me a unique note. Let's play a game, okay? Someone tell me a unique note from this set. And we can't repeat the note once someone said it. Give me a unique note. D, okay. Another unique note.
A.
A, okay. DNA, the code of life. Okay, another one. One more note in there. Does anyone see it?
F.
F sharp? Okay, I challenge anyone in this class to find another note. I will give you $1 million if you find another note in this measure that's unique. Okay. Okay, well, there's no other note in there, so I made a safe wager. Yeah, it's just D, A, and F sharp, which conveniently represents a D major triad. So this is something that you'll see a lot. This is just, what they call here is just an arpeggiation of the D major chord, okay? So this D major chord in the key of D major happens to be a very nice 1 chord, okay? Not surprising, right? Now, let's take a look at this chord right here. Let's actually pull out the handy dandy drawing circle. So there's actually 2 chords that I'm going to separate right here. There's a chord here, and there's a chord here. There's 2 little things that could be made into snowmen, okay? So we'll call this chord 1, and we'll call this chord F, and we'll call this chord G, okay? Just to make our homework our work a little neater, okay? So chord F, let's figure it out. What is chord F made of? It's made up of which notes? It's made up of A, D, and F sharp. Okay, just practicing this so I don't butcher it. Okay, great. A, D, and F sharp. Okay, what is this in the key? Roman numeral wise, or just speak in your answers. If you're in the chat, I actually keep the chat window closed for the most part because it takes up too much space on the screen. But I can move it to the side. That's fine. I just moved it to the side. Okay, someone said the 1 chord. Great, it's a D major chord. Equals the 1 chord. Great, so let's look at chord G. Okay, so what do we have? What notes do we have? A, C sharp, and E, which happens to be what chord? Right. It happens to be an A major chord, which happens to be a 5 chord. So what we see from F to G is really, well, what do we see? We see a 1 chord going to a 5 chord, which is a nice old half cadence. Classic, right? Finally, I got that right. Okay, great. Awesome. So we see a half cadence at the beginning of phrase 1, phrase A, okay? Now phrase 2 starts the same way as phrase 1. However, it's slightly transposed. And just to kind of illuminate the idea of transposition, let's play the same game we played on phrase A, and I want you to speak in a unique note, one at a time, okay? So what's a unique note?
E.
Okay.
B.
One more.
G.
Great. E, B, and G. So E, B, and G, well, that makes a snowman. If you think about it, if you stack these as thirds, you'll get an E minor triad. Okay? Which in the key actually ends up being what chord? What is E minor, an E minor chord in the key of D major?
2.
2 chord.
2 chord, lowercase 2 chord. Okay, awesome. So it doesn't matter that this quality changed because the contour is still the same, right? It still has a reference to the same melodic idea. It's just transposed. It's not, okay, I shouldn't say the word transposed. It's sequenced if I'm trying to be consistent with what's on your homework. This isn't transposed because this actually is different intervallically. If this was transposed, this would be exactly the same quality. What you get here is an E major triad. But this is sequenced, right? This is just, if I basically did this in D major, whoops, I would get different chords. Basically, I'd get the the triads of the major scale. But if I just played this transposed, I would get really get a whole tone scale, because I would just basically be, well, I wouldn't necessarily get a whole tone scale, but I would just basically get the same quality for every single chord. Because this is sequenced, I'm getting a D major quality here, and I'm getting an E minor quality here, despite the fact that these two, I'm getting a different chord quality for both of these chords. And both of these chords have the same exact melodic contour, okay? So let's make haste and let's check out the very end of this exercise. And we might encounter a little bit of sussiness. Mozart liked sussiness. Let's actually analyze 3 of these chords. Okay, so we'll call this chord chord H. We'll call this chord chord I. And we'll call this chord chord J. All right, my New Jersey accent's coming out. I used to live there until I was 12. All right, so we'll call chord H. Okay, let's analyze chord H. So what do we got? What pitches do we have? Well, we've got an A, we've got an E, we've got a C sharp. Everyone can see that, right? Okay, well, hopefully you can see that if we rearrange that into a snowman, you get an A major chord, correct? So chord H is really an A major chord, which happens to be the 5 chord. Okay, let's look at chord I. Ooh, I don't like how it recapitalizes that. Nope. Ah, come on. Okay, there we go. Chord I. What do we have? Well, we have D, and we have G, and we have G. Is that right? No, that's not right. I'm doing something wrong. D, G, and E. Let's skip chord I for a second. Let's go to chord H. Sort chord J. Okay. Okay, so what do we have here? We have D, F sharp, and D. Okay? So what we really have here is the making of a snowman, right? Not really a complete snowman. If I drew this out, what you would find is this. Right? It's a snowman that almost could, right? It's a snowman that is so close to having that, right? Oftentimes, you'll see triads represented in this way. You'll see triads with the 5th omitted, and you'll see triads with the root doubled, okay? So it just happens to be that this chord right here, D, F sharp, D, is really communicating a 1 chord. Interesting, right? So what you see from chord H to chord J, okay, between chord H and chord J is what kind of cadence?
Authentic.
It's an authentic cadence. And then, you know, you might have wondered, well, what about chord I? Well, chord I is basically a sus chord. And then check this out. It's basically a double sus. Like it basically, this G, let's take a look at this. What you have here is this. Whoops. Give me a sec, guys. What you have here is this. If I were to draw this as an arrow, basically you have chord, that note wanting to go down and resolve. And then you have this chord wanting to go down and resolve. And what they actually call this is a double appoggiatura. I'm pretty sure. And basically there's 2 notes in this chord that are non-chord tones. And they resolve downwards. And we'll come back to this chord eventually. This is a cool chord. But you can kind of see how, I was describing how sus chords basically, they have this property where there's a specific note in the chord that wants to resolve down, like this fourth wants to resolve to the third, right? This fourth wants to resolve to this third. Like a similar analogy, if I actually drew an arrow in this slide, would be it wants to do that, right? Or this wants to do that, right? So a similar situation is occurring here. This is like a sus chord in some manner because there are a couple of notes that are basically being suspended. They're not quite resolved, and they're going to be, the suspension will be relieved to notes that are actually in the chord. I could say more about suspensions, but I'll just leave it at that. Hopefully it's a satisfactory explanation for you about chord I. There's a lot more to say about suspensions. Another property of suspensions is that oftentimes the notes of a suspension, the notes can be held over from a previous chord. So for in this particular case, this E is actually suspended from this previous chord in a not so easy to see way. So I'll just leave it at this. I'll say basically this. The notes of a suspension, the notes that are suspended, that leave you in suspense, ultimately get substituted. They're substitutions of notes that are actually in the chord. And these are the notes that they have eventually resolved to. So exempting chord I, you basically see this general motion of going from a 5 chord to a 1 chord. You see this authentic cadence, okay? So this is all to say two things. The first thing is to say is that this looks like we have parallel period structure here, because we have two phrases, and these two phrases begin in the same manner, right? The second thing to say is that the first phrase ends in a weak cadence, half cadence, and the second phrase ends in a strong cadence. In fact, not just an authentic cadence, but a perfect authentic cadence. Okay? And that is really what makes this a parallel period. Any questions about this before I keep going? Or does this make sense? Okay, great. Double period, okay. So a double period, it consists of two consecutive periods, and it really has 4 phrases total. Here's the hint. If you see an answer on your homework that has 4 phrases, it's going to be a double period because there's no other definition that we've covered that has that many phrases, okay? So if somehow you see something on your homework that's segmented into 4 phrases, well, that's a double period. The reason I segmented that in that manner, in fact, I can just talk about that homework question right now and why this can be a little confusing for analysis as a teachable moment. Okay, where is it? I'm gonna have to go to my Finder. I'm gonna have to go to see homework 3. All right. Now, the reason that these definitions can be a little confusing is the following. Before I actually tell you this, let me actually finish explaining what a double period is. So a double period has this phrase to start with. Okay? It has basically a plagal cadence right here. And the reason I know it's a plagal cadence is because I'm looking at the downbeat, and then I'm looking at the subsequent big beats. And what do I get? Okay, so what key are we in really quickly? We're in the key of what?
G.
Did someone say B?
G.
I think we're in the key of C. G major. Okay. And then right here, we basically start with a 1 chord. You see a very tidy snowman that confirms that, right? Here, it's not so clear. Although you do see a third, a major third, which oftentimes is enough to communicate a triad, which in fact is all that we need. This is all the information that we're given. we're given a C and an E. Those are the only unique notes that we're given. Now, going back to that previous kind of idea I was telling you about how in classical music, oftentimes they leave out the fifth, right? What you see here is basically this idea that there's a snowman that is basically incomplete, but you still see the makings of a snowman. So in that sense, you can kind of figure out that this is basically a 4 chord or a C major. Let's just make the assumption that this is a C major chord, which is a 4 chord. Okay, and then right here, what do we have? Well, we have a B and a G, and we have some other Gs, so I won't circle them because they're the same. Okay, so what do we have? We have a B and a G. What do we get when we take a B and a G and we try to make a snowman out of it? We get that. We get the makings of a snowman once again. Okay? So let's consider the bass note of the snowman as the root of the chord, okay? So if that's the case, if we have G and B, right? And G happens to be the root of the snowman, well, what chord is this? G major chord, right? It's a 1 chord, okay? Again, we're working with an incomplete snowman here, but from our traditional definition of a snowman, when you have a snowman, you look at the bottom note of the snowman to determine the root of the chord, right? So when you have an incomplete snowman, you still look at the bottom note of the snowman to determine the root of the chord. So that's consistent, right? And you can see how you can take this interval and make it into a snowman, right? So what we have is basically a 4 chord going to a 1 chord. Now that right there is what?
Plagal cadence.
Plagal cadence. Okay, great. All right, so then we have this. Okay, we have a half cadence right here that's given to us. Basically, we have, well, there's many ways you could figure this out. It's given to us right here, so it's not so hard to figure out. But you have the making sort of a snowman right here. It's the opposite kind of makings, where you just have a fifth. You might find that the only way to make a snowman, an incomplete snowman, is by actually having a fifth, right? And the middle note is left out. But the same principle applies. The bottom note of this incomplete or complete snowman is the root of the chord. So what we have really is a 5 chord, which is a half cadence. Okay, this is really the important cadence right here. I guess that for a double period, I think the second phrase is the most important. The final phrase of each period is the one that's really important because you're really comparing this phrase with this phrase. The last phrase of the first period with the last phrase of the second period. But just for posterity, we're just going to analyze this because I think it's kind of good to learn how to analyze chords out of notes that aren't so snowman looking. This one's hard. This one is not so straightforward. Oh my goodness. Well, let's just look at the first beat. What do we have? B and G inverts into a snowman, an incomplete snowman. So what do we have at this particular moment? We have a G major chord, right? Which happens to be a 1 chord. Okay. Now let's look at this one. Okay, right here. Okay. let's analyze these 3 chords, because there's actually 3 chords happening right here in this measure. Oh gosh, this is not going to look too pretty, but I'm going to do my best. It's just the way it is, folks. I'm sorry. You might be wondering, why couldn't he just relate the note with the bottom note with the note directly above it? Well, interesting music breaks rules. That's just the way it is. So really what's happening is there's 4 circles here. This one right here, the CA, if we make C, let's actually just bring this to Sibelius. I'm going to transfer these 4 circles to Sibelius, okay? So what we have is basically okay? So let's take this and let's make all of these intervals. These are the intervals that I circled, exactly the way they look, okay? Let's take these intervals and let's flip them. Now, granted, don't be freaked out by some of this stuff. Some of this stuff is just experiential learning. I won't be quizzing you on some of this stuff, but I have more time now that we don't have to do as many in-class activities. So I'm going to be teaching you stuff that you might not necessarily get quizzed on, but for the sake of a holistic music education, I think it's worth learning this stuff. In fact, especially since this stuff is pertinent to your homework. Even if I give you the answer to some of these questions, it's still good to know why I gave you the answers to certain questions. So there's just less singing we can do in class, so it opens up opportunities to do some more analysis. So with that disclaimer given, let's jump into analysis. So first of all, from before, we're actually in the key of C major, right? No, we're in the key of G major. What am I saying? We're in the key of G major. Sorry, my cat is meowing. I don't know if you hear that. All right. So what we have is basically, if we take this CA and we make it into a snowman, we get this, right? If we take this D and B and we make it into an incomplete snowman, we get this. Okay. Okay. So
should that be the D on the top in that second measure? Or no, because it looks like you put a G and a B on accident instead of a B and a D.
Oh, right. I see what you're saying. Like that, right? No, wait, what am I doing? Oh, sorry. Oh, I see. There we go. Is that what you said? Or am I going in circles now?
Well, I think that.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, gosh. Oh, it's this. No, wait. Sorry, I'm very confused right now. Give me a second to think about this. Oh, gosh.
Should be a B and then a D on the top.
Right, like this. Sorry, I was hoping that we didn't have to come to this scenario right here. This analysis, guys. This is one tricky thing about analysis. I'm sorry in advance. Because you know how earlier I said that the root of the incomplete snowman would always be, the base note of the incomplete snowman would always be the root of the chord? Doesn't seem like that's always the case. So for instance, the root of this chord is actually, I'll put this in a different color. I'll put this in cyan. That's actually the root of the chord. it's not really given at that particular time. So I guess I can actually fill in the other notes of the snowman and just put them in different colors. Okay. Okay. So just follow along with me. Let's actually analyze this now. Let's see. So bear with me for 1 second. Okay. So what is this chord in the key of G major? This is an A minor triad, right? What is this chord?
G major.
I'm sorry, this is not a 6 chord. An A minor triad is actually a 2 chord, right? And this right here is a 1 chord. And this one right here is?
I.
Great. 1, right? Okay. Whether or not you had any idea how I filled in these shadow notes, well, irregardless of that, you can agree on this conclusion that I've come up with based on what I've revealed right here, right? There's a lot of magic, a lot of hand waviness I'm giving you right here. And this is why I'm not necessarily going to give this to you on your homework. But be warned, you're going to have to do stuff like this in 2C and 101 series. Music in real life is much more messy than when you're like, oh, this is the 1 chord, this is the 4 chord. For instance, right here, I drew this little connection between this note and this note, because right here, if I drew a connection from this note to this note, it would actually be a sus chord, which finally resolves to the resultant correct note right here. Anyway, I'll save this. We're probably going to come to this at another time during the quarter, but I want to move on. This is all to say that what we have here, let's get back to the bigger picture here. We're kind of getting caught in the nuts and bolts right here. So what we really have is we're contrasting this half cadence in the first period with an authentic cadence in the second period. And what you see is the first period is weaker than the second period. So what we actually get is this thing called double period. But here's the weird thing, okay, guys? This is actually why I got some of the answers wrong incorrectly. So you see how there's 4 phrases here? Let's say like there's some, let's say that this is a plagal cadence again. Right, it is, because this is a 4 chord. What if I just got rid of this phrase and I only considered this 8 measure phrase against this 8 measure phrase? Wouldn't that just be a parallel period? That would just be 1 period, right? If I consider this as 4 phrases, what I get is a double period. But if I consider this whole thing as 2 phrases, what I get is a period. If that makes sense. So for instance, if I get rid of this right here, and I'm like, I don't care about this, I'm not considering this part as a phrase. What I'm left with is 2 phrases, right? This is what's a little confusing. This is why I precisely got the problems wrong on the homework, because I segmented the answers correctly, and it's quite a subjective enterprise. So going to your homework, let's look at the double period example. I'm actually just going to give you the answer for this one. It's pretty much given to you. So over here we have 4 phrases, right? I came across the same exact thing. This is why I actually annotated. These red markings weren't actually in the book, in case you didn't know. I actually put them in myself. When I originally did this homework, I actually segmented this gigantic thing as 1 phrase. And this gigantic thing is another phrase. And then I thought, well, it's obviously a parallel period, right? Because this material reappears right here, right? But the way the book wants you to do it is it wants you to think of this first 4 measures as a phrase, this 4 measures as a phrase, this third 4 measures as a phrase, and these fourth 4 measures as a phrase. So what you really get, the answer, incidentally, if you're giving you all that backstory, I guess the answer to this question is a double period. It's a double period because you're basically contrasting phrase 1 and phrase 2, which is a period, against phrase 3 and phrase 4, which is a period. And the only definition we've had where we have 4 phrases that fit into a definition, the only concept that we've studied that has 4 phrases is a double period. So anyway, hopefully that was a scintillating look into music analysis. I apologize if that was a little dense for you guys. I found it interesting, but then again, I've been doing this for a long time and I'm nerding out on this stuff. But this is an important thing to start being able to do, because when you actually do have to do analysis projects, at least at a minimum, you'll have to start looking at chords and identifying them based on specific integral parts of the measure. So like this process of actually looking at the big beats and deriving chords, that's a process that you'll run into. Now, granted, if the process is a little bit harder, like this measure right here, where you need some more advanced inferencing capabilities that you'll learn, the teacher will often just give you the answer to that particular measure. But that doesn't necessarily absolve you from the responsibility of actually having to do this reductive analysis in the real world, to some degree, okay? So kind of have this in the back of your mind as something that you're gonna have to know how to do to reduce a piece of music that you see into Roman numeral analysis when things aren't so clear cut. Okay? Phrase group and phrase chain. We're getting back into the big picture again. So a phrase group or a phrase chain occurs when phrases have irregular groupings, such as 3 or 5 phrases. So in this particular case, the first 2 phrases end with incomplete cadences, half cadence or deceptive or imperfect authentic. And the last one ends with an authentic cadence. Okay. What key are we in? We are in the key of what?
E major.
D major, right? Okay, so we're in the key of D major. So what do we basically have right here? At the last chord. I guess I'll circle a chord for you that I'm describing. What do we have here? Well, we have B and we have E, which basically makes up.
So it looks like we can't see what you're typing in there. Oh, there it goes.
You can see it now? Oh, it might have just lagged out for a second.
Just lagging. Yeah.
So what we have here is a B and an E. Whoops. Right. So this is an incomplete snowman of sorts. Now going back to our assumption, which I guess isn't always true, but let's just assume it's true. The root of the snowman is the bass note of this. The root of the chord is the bass note of the snowman. Okay, so basically we have an E major chord here, right? Which happens to be the 5 chord. Okay. Let's look at phrase 2. Okay. I'm circling the spots that are a little bit that you're expected to sort of correlate to each other. So I'm doing a lot of the hard work for you, but you still have some work to do. The reason I didn't include this note is because I recognize that this is a sus note. This is a note that ultimately resolves to a chord that's actually a note that's in the chord. That's why I didn't circle it. So if I'm just looking at this entity of circled notes, what do we have? I'm going to ask Kim, what do we have? What notes, unique notes do we have in this chord?
G.
We have G sharp.
Oh yeah, sorry. G sharp, E, F.
Well, that's all we have.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. Very good. All right, let me switch to grid view. They haven't implemented this feature yet where I can scroll through multiple pages in the regular view. I'm going to ask Genome. Genome, what chord are we dealing with right here?
Me?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I'll stay on you, Genome. So you have this, right? So that's basically what we have right there. Now, if we understand that the base note of the snowman is actually the root of the chord, then what is the root of this chord?
Oh, E?
Exactly.
E major?
So it would be E major, exactly. So E major, thank you, Gino. E major chord, which happens to be the 5 chord. Okay, great. Okay, I like this. I'm just gonna call on people. Awesome. All right. Ella Stimson, you are next. All right. So what do we got? We got this thing right here. So I'll segment this for you. I'm going to segment this in this following way. Really, the trick in segmenting stuff is knowing like which notes are part of sus chords and which notes aren't part of sus chords. Because sus chords are sort of intermediate chords that ultimately resolve to chords that aren't sus chords. But if we look at these notes, which are a little bit hard to see, but every single note in the bass clef that's circled is the same note in the treble clef. So what do we have unique note-wise here?
C, E, and A.
C, E, and A, okay. So let's see. Okay, so what we have really is, did I say that this is in D major? I'm sorry. This is actually confusing because the key signature is D major, but the idea is actually in A major. So, but anyway, let's not worry about that for a second. So Ella, you have C sharp, E, and A. So what chord could this be?
Is it an A major chord or 1 chord?
Exactly, it's an A major chord. And let's just pretend, even though key signature doesn't say this, let's just pretend that we are in A major, which is actually the harmonic analysis that I gave earlier, the 5 chord. So we're actually in the 1 chord key area. Great. So hopefully you see in this phrase group or this phrase chain, you see the first 2 phrases as being incomplete or weaker cadences, and you see the final phrase as being a stronger cadence. The key word here, though, is irregular number of phrases, like 3 or 5 or things like that. But let's see. So, all right, very good. Elision. An elision is the overlapping of 2 phrases, okay, in which the last measure of the first phrase acts as the first measure of the second phrase, okay? So let's take a look at this example right here. Ooh. It ends like this, in case you're wondering. So here's the thing. You have a phrase here. It's almost as if this 4-measure phrase. Okay, let's just look at this. That sounds convincing on its own accord, right? Okay, great. Now let's look at phrase 2. So the point of an elision is the fact that these two phrases are elided. This entity right here actually is shared both amongst phrase 1 and it's shared amongst phrase 2. So there's some overlap. Cool, right? That's elision. Okay. So hopefully this all makes sense. Is this kind of clear? Let's go to the homework. Sorry, Kayla, I said I would talk about the homework much sooner, but I ended up talking about it much later. Kayla, since you were the one who asked the question at the very beginning of class, let's see, where is Kayla? Kayla?
Hello?
Oh, hey, there you are. Okay, cool. Sorry, I have to scroll through many pages to find someone. Okay, Kayla, what was your question about the homework?
Okay, well, I kind of went and fixed it, but number 3, I had like extended version and fragmentation's wrong, but I had extended version, fragmentation, and counter melody all marked. But I think I stuck with extended version. I don't know why I put fragmentation, and then counter melody is something that I'm like still kind of iffy about.
Okay, so get ready for some answers, everyone, because the best way I can actually describe these homework problems is by just kind of giving you the answer to some degree, right? Because it's going to be kind of obvious by the time I can finish my explanations. So let's actually look at number 3 really quickly because I don't know what the answer is yet. So the original melody that it's based on is. Okay. So what we have, okay, so we have the beginnings of the melody. Okay. And then instead of playing this F, it actually does more stuff. So it's almost as if my first instinct is that this might be an extended, well, let's just think about what it's not. Diminution. Is this somehow being halved in value? Is it doing this? No, it's not doing that, right? It's not somehow like getting faster by taking these rhythmic values and squashing them into double the duration, half the duration, right? Is it fragmenting? Well, is it fragmenting?
I think not.
I think not. You know what, I'm gonna, just so I don't stub my toe on this one, I'm actually gonna look at the answer just to make sure that I think the answer that I'm getting is actually the correct answer. Let's consider counter melody. Is it a counter melody? Probably not, right? Because, well, there's not more than one melody happening at the same time, so it can't be a counter melody. Okay. Now, I guess the two that we're stuck between is fragmentation or extended version. Now, the weird thing about extended version is usually it refers to an extension after the phrase ended. And so this looks more like an internal expansion. Fragmentation, you don't really see elements of this derived from the original melody, right? You don't see that at all. So I don't think it's fragmentation at all because it's not actually. If it was fragmentation, it would basically be using elements of the melody. Like there would be like an element of this, and it would just go to this. It would just kind of jump between all these different fragments and kind of generate a new melody. However, all this new material doesn't have any bearing to the original melody, which really makes me think it's an extended version. But just to confirm, this is answer number 2. Or question number 3. Sorry, one sec. Yeah, it's an extended version. Okay, great. I was looking at the wrong answer key and I was like, oh gosh, did I get this wrong? No, it's an extended version. Okay, not that that's the answer or anything. Okay, great. Let's see, what else do we have here?
Number 7 was the other one that I had like confusion.
Ah, okay. So
And
here's
for
the
that-
thing. Here's how I want you to think about this one. So think about this one as try to find patterns, because ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to find a pattern, and then you're trying to compare one incidence of the pattern with another incidence of the pattern. So what you see right here is immediately you find a pattern, right? You see a pattern that's here. You see these two things, right? So then you got to say, well, what if I compare this thing against this thing, right? So this first thing against this thing. Wait a second. Sorry, guys. So I know my answer to this. I guess there's two potential answers, because I'm looking at the answer key and it actually disagrees with my answer, which is frustrating. But here's what I would say about this. I'll actually go through and I'll actually complete this answer. I'll complete my own version of this myself, and I'll see how close or far away I am. This is more of a heuristic exercise. So what I'll say about this is that what I think of when I look at this is extension, because I see this particular passage right here. I think of this as the motif. And then I see this motif and I see this getting expanded, right? It's kind of getting extended. Another way you can look at this is this little idea right here is being repeated. But then what do you make of all this extra stuff right here? So my best answer is extension. But I believe, if I'm not interpreting the book incorrectly, is that the book thinks this is repetition. Okay. Sorry, that was a little bit of a downer. Not really. It just kind of speaks to the idea that music theory is a subjective enterprise to some degree. And it's really about thinking about these terms that really that's where the strength lies. In fact, when I complete any of these problems, I actually have to think about all of the scenarios. And that's really where that's really where you learn the subject matter.
So are these melodic phrases still based on the top one given at the very beginning? Are they all based on the same one, or are these independent phrases?
6 and 7 onwards are independent. The first 5 are based on the first original melody. Will repetition be marked wrong? No, repetition will not be marked wrong. Tate says, are we going to get marked off if we answer a certain question subjectively that is not the correct answer in the book? There's going to be a range of acceptable answers. Let's just put it that way. And the range of acceptable answers will be determined by me and by the book. And because there's some clearly incorrect answers. Some certain answers you can't really ever think that they could be that thing. For instance, if there's 2 incidences of an answer, is there only one answer for each exercise? Yes, there's only one answer for each exercise. And I think this case that I found right here is just like a random example of finding something that I disagreed with. Random incidents. But do your best. And there's going to be a range of answers, so that improves your chances of getting points for this particular homework. But for most answers, there'll only be one answer. All right, let's look at another one. let's find one that actually. What's another one you guys want to talk about?
About 10.
7?
10.
Oh, 10. Okay, great. That makes more sense. Okay. All right. Well, is conjunct an answer? Can it be? It can't be, right? Is there any interval here that's stepwise? Not at all, right? It's not stepwise at all. Is there anything here that's repeated? No. Is there anything here that's imitated? Where you have basically a passage that's, well, I guess you'd need a separate voice in some regard for pure imitation, right? You'd need a separate staff where this idea was repeated in like the oboe part or something, right? That's not happening here. Is this disjunct? This looks like a pretty good answer, doesn't it, right? There's not really any stepwise motion. It looks like the best answer, correct? So I'd say most of the answers are like this. There's like clearly a best answer. Like the answer here is disjunct. Okay? Okay, that's another freebie right there. All right. I'll give you one more. Someone think wisely about something they need help with. Okay. Okay, great. I think everyone gets it. Okay. All right. So anyway, I want to talk about form a little bit. And we're going to talk over the course of the quarter, we're going to talk about form. And there's going to be a slight homework component to this where you just have to identify form. And the basic idea of, we've talked about the blues form. We kind of loosely discussed it. At some point, I might actually put it on the homework. I mean, there's basically 12 bars in the blues form, and there's significant harmonic occurrences on the 5th measure and the 9th measure, right? And we're talking about the 12-bar blues form, right? 16-bar blues form is slightly different. There's significant harmonic information at certain spots. There's still significant information at measure 5, measure 9, but there's also an additional spot. I'll just draw these significances. We never talked about the 16 measure blues form. So let's see. I'll actually play it for you. Actually, I'm going to play it exactly the way it's written here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Okay, so it's 16 bars. Let's see. I'm going to simplify this in a way that doesn't have as many chord changes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 chord, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 7, 8, 10, 10, 10. Okay. 16-bar blues chord progression. This isn't as common of chord progression as the regular 12-bar blues form. So I will say this. I'm just going to get rid of it. I don't want to confuse you guys anymore. The main thing about the 12-bar blues form that you'll see a lot is that essentially you'll see something on bar 1, you'll see something on bar 5, you'll see a different chord on bar 9. And those chords specifically, you'll see the 1 chord on bar 1, you'll see the 4 chord on bar 5, and you'll see, most often, you'll see the 5 chord on bar 9, okay? That's the most common blues form that you'll encounter. There's all these subtle variations, but within the 12-bar blues form, there are plenty of variations within them to kind of keep you busy. So let's just stick to the 12-bar blues form. So I remember a while back, I kind of gave you this activity where I asked you to raise your hands whenever I was changing to the 4 chord or to the 5 chord, right? I just want to do that one more time. So raise your hand, but actually, if you can, raise it on the camera so I can actually see. So I can't see all these thumbs ups. All right, so I'm going to play the 12-bar blues form. I'm going to count at the speed. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how quickly each bar advances. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ready, 2, ready, go. One more time. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so that's the 12-bar blues form. It basically has, I guess, very appropriately named, it has 12 measures or 12 bars. And it has these particular chords at these particular moments, for the most part. Now, there are exceptions, right? As you look down the line of all these variations, you don't see any disagreement. The 1 chord always starts the 12-bar blues form, no matter what specific variation you create. The 4 chord still always comes on bar 5, no matter which variation you have. However, on bar 9, the majority of situations have the 5 chord, right? There are situations where the 4 chord might happen on bar 9, but that's very unusual. So that's basically the signature for the 12-bar blues form, okay? We've got a minute left, but I will say this. This is actually what I wanted to talk about today, but I didn't get a chance to some degree. We'll talk about this next time. But I guess another form that you could have is this form called binary form, okay? And binary form essentially is described as A-B form. Okay, so you have basically one section, and then you have a contrasting section. Okay, so you have an A section, you have a B section, essentially. And there are all kinds of peculiarities, especially in classical era, about specific types of binary form, which we'll kind of describe. Again, this will be something that we'll discuss. The real nuts and bolts of it are not the focus of the class, but it will be tested on to some degree. But it's important to kind of know bigger picture things as well. You know, it's funny. It's important to know bigger picture things, but it's also important to know the nuts and details things, all of which you're going to be exposed to further on in your music education. But sometimes it's good to have a good big picture understanding of stuff. And I think that's the rationale behind the music department when they ask that I actually do talk about these things, even though it's the first year of music theory. So don't be overwhelmed. Just kind of have these things in the back of your mind if you don't feel like you completely understand them. We'll develop an understanding of them over time. If not this year, over time. So it's just, the point is to expose you to different things and that the school wants you to be exposed to and what I want you to be exposed to. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense and hopefully you got something out of that. And let's see, I guess it's already Tuesday. Well, it's Tuesday. I guess I'll stop my share. I'll stop my